You're using English. Everything is working. You understand. You're following the conversation. Then something changes. Not outside, inside. The situation becomes important. Maybe the question matters. Maybe the person matters. Maybe the answer feels like it represents you. And right there, English begins to thin out. Not gone, not erased, just harder to reach. That moment is what we're going to live inside today. Because most people misunderstand it. They call it fear, they call it anxiety, they call it lack of confidence. But that's not what it is. Pressure is not emotion. Pressure is interruption. Let's slow this way down. Before English disappears, you are still thinking clearly. You still know the idea, you still understand the meaning, you still want to respond. What changes is not knowledge. What changes is timing. You interrupt English before it finishes forming, and you don't even realize you did it. Now, listen carefully. English does not arrive as a finished sentence. It arrives as a direction, a movement, a beginning. But under pressure, you stop that beginning. You wait. Waiting feels responsible. Waiting feels careful. Waiting feels intelligent. But spoken language does not survive waiting. Spoken language survives continuation. Now, let's talk about what pressure really is. Pressure is not stress. Pressure is expectation of outcome. The moment you want the sentence to land well, pressure enters. Not loudly, not emotionally, mechanically. You start supervising speech, and supervision kills momentum. This is the core idea. Not fear, not lack of words, not grammar. Supervision. Now, think about how you speak your native language. You don't supervise it. You don't preview sentences. You don't check tone in advance. You speak and adjust while speaking. English hasn't earned that freedom yet, so you try to protect it. Protection is pressure. Now let's talk about protection, honestly. You are not protecting English. You are protecting your image, how you sound, how you appear, what your English says about you. This makes English heavy. Heavy language moves slowly. Now let's zoom in on the exact moment again. Someone finishes speaking. There is a small silence. That silence feels loud. Inside that silence, your mind does something very fast. It scans. Is this okay? Is this correct? Should I say it like this? That scan interrupts formation. English freezes mid-build. Not broken, paused. Now let's talk about pauses. Pauses are not bad, but evaluative pauses are dangerous. They stop motion without replacing it. Fluent speakers pause inside motion. Learners pause before motion. That's the difference. Now think about this carefully. Once the first word comes out, pressure drops, almost always. Why? Because movement has started. Movement reduces supervision. Supervision increases only in stillness. Now let's talk about starting. Most learners think starting means choosing the right words. It doesn't. Starting means making sound, any sound. Well, so, yeah, I think. These are not filler. They are permission. They allow English to enter time. Once English is in time, it organizes itself. This is not philosophy. This is mechanics. Now, let's talk about shadowing again, but differently. Shadowing is not a pronunciation exercise. It's a timing exercise. You learn how it feels to continue without stopping. You learn that nothing bad happens when you don't supervise. Your nervous system learns safety. That safety is what pressure removes. Now let's talk about the illusion of control. Control feels like intelligence, but in speech, control creates delay. Delay increases self-awareness. Self-awareness increases pressure. This loop is why English disappears, not because English is weak, but because it's being watched. Now let's talk about a hard truth. English becomes more fragile as you improve. Why? Because you care more. Beginners don't expect much. Advanced learners expect coherence. Expectation is pressure. Pressure demands supervision. Supervision blocks flow. Now pause here. Notice how this explains so much. Why you spoke better years ago in simple English. Why now, with more vocabulary, you hesitate more. It's not regression, it's ownership conflict. You now feel responsible for English. Responsibility is heavy. Now let's slow down again. Take a breath, not to relax, to release control. Good. Now notice something. If you speak even a little, imperfectly, pressure drops immediately. Why? Because expectation dissolves. Expectation lives before speech. Reality lives during speech.
Now let's stay here longer, because most people rush past this part, and this is where everything actually changes. Pressure does not leave when you improve. It becomes quieter, more intelligent, more convincing. At beginner level, pressure is obvious. It sounds like fear. It feels like panic. At higher levels, pressure sounds reasonable. It sounds like standards. It sounds like self-respect. It sounds like I should sound clear. That's why advanced learners suffer more silently. Now let's slow this way down. When you reach a certain level in English, you stop worrying about words. You worry about continuity. You don't want to just say something. You want it to make sense. You want it to connect. You want it to reflect your thinking accurately. This is where pressure becomes dangerous. Because now, before speaking, you don't just wait for English. You wait for alignment. Alignments between your idea, your language, and your image. That alignment rarely arrives on time. Conversation does not wait for alignment. It moves. So you miss the moment, not because you couldn't speak, but because you demanded too much from speech. Now let's talk about demand. Spoken language collapses under demand. It thrives under allowance. Allowance sounds careless, but it's not. Allowance means, I will continue even if this is not perfect. This single decision removes most pressure, but learners resist it. Why? Because allowance feels like losing control. Now let's talk about control deeply. Control in speech is delayed correction. You try to fix the sentence before it exists. This is impossible. You can only fix something that already exists. Trying to fix silence creates paralysis. This is why so many learners feel, I know English, but I can't access it. You're trying to edit before creation. Now let's talk about editing. Editing belongs after speech, never before. Native speakers edit while speaking. They change direction, they restart, they abandon sentences, and nobody notices. Learners believe sentences must be completed. They don't. They only need to continue interaction. Now let's talk about interaction. Conversation is not about sentences. It's about response energy. Energy matters more than accuracy. A short, imperfect response keeps energy alive. A perfect response that never arrives kills it. Now think carefully. How many times did you stay silent because you wanted to say it right? That silence felt heavy, not because you were quiet, but because you were holding speech hostage. Now let's talk about holding. Holding speech increases tension. Tension narrows access. Narrow access feels like English disappearing. Now let's talk about the body again. Under pressure, the body braces, slightly, almost invisibly. Breath becomes shallow, jaw stiffens, tongue hesitates. This is not fear, it's readiness gone wrong. Readiness without movement becomes blockage. Now let's talk about readiness. Readiness is meant to launch action, not replace it. But many learners stay in readiness. They stay about to speak. About to speak is the most exhausting state. It uses energy without release. That's why pressure feels draining. Now let's talk about exhaustion. Many learners think English tires them because it's difficult, but English tires them because it is contained. Energy builds with no outlet. Speaking releases energy. Holding speech stores it. Stored energy feels like pressure. Now let's talk about release. Release does not require confidence, it requires permission. Permission to start wrong, permission to interrupt yourself, permission to abandon a sentence halfway. These permissions feel irresponsible, but they create flow. Flow restores stability. Now let's talk about stability under pressure. Stability is not calm. Stability is recoverability. Can you continue after a mistake, an interruption, a misunderstanding? If yes, English is stable. If no, English feels fragile. Now let's talk about fragility again. Fragility comes from perfection dependency. If English only works when conditions are ideal, it is fragile. Stability comes from exposure to imperfect conditions, not practice, exposure. You don't practice pressure, you survive it. And every survival teaches your system, this is okay.
Now let's talk about the biggest misunderstanding. People think fluency comes from confidence. It doesn't. Confidence comes from fluency. And fluency comes from continuation. Continuation under imperfect conditions. Now let's talk about advanced learners again. Advanced learners freeze because they see more options. More options means more choice. More choice means more delay. Delay increases pressure. Beginners speak faster because they have fewer options. This is not skill. This is constraint. Constraint helps movement. This is why limiting yourself to simple English often improves fluency. Not because simple is better, but because fewer choices mean faster movement. Now let's talk about speed differently. Speed is not talking fast. Speed is entering on time. If you enter late, even fast speech feels awkward. If you enter early, slow speech feels fluent. Timing beats speed. Now let's talk about timing training. Timing is trained through long listening, shadowing, and low-pressure response, not through grammar exercises. Grammar builds structure. Timing builds access. Now let's talk about access again. Access is emotional neutrality. When English feels neutral, it flows. When English feels important, it stiffens. This is why joking English flows, serious English blocks. Now let's talk about seriousness. Seriousness adds responsibility. Responsibility adds supervision. Supervision adds pressure. This is mechanical. Now let's talk about the final shift again, but slower. One day, pressure appears. You feel it. You notice it. But you don't obey it. You speak anyway. Not to prove something, not to perform, just to continue. That moment changes everything, because now pressure is present but no longer in control. English moves with pressure, not against it. That is real fluency. Now let's close this properly. Not with encouragement, with precision. English does not disappear under pressure. Pressure interrupts movement. Movement restores English. That's the entire system. Nothing mystical, nothing motivational. Just how speech works.